Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about environment variables, and if you've never used environment variables, I'm going to take a second just to explain what that is, and then we're going to look at how to use it with Zeit. So first of all, I have this diagram in front of me and I have this block representing our code, and this represents what I would call environment variables, and these are separate from our code. So there's a few reasons why you do this. First of all, it's a nice separation of concerns. So if I have like a DB password or like a DB URL, if I'm hitting a certain URL on either on my local machine or over the internet or whatever, I'm going to have that specified here. And so it's nice because then I have one file to go to switch it up. So that's nice. But a way more important reason is for security. So if you check in like passwords and keys into your Git repo, you don't know who's going to see that. Like all the developers are going to see that, and that might be awkward because you don't know who you're going to be hiring in the future, and maybe it's just better to not include it to keep it secure. And also, if someone was to get into your code, into your server somehow, sort of in a wrong way, or in a bad way, then they could see all those in your code base. And anyways, it's from a security standpoint, it's not a good idea. And then from like a deployment sort of management standpoint, it's not a good idea either. It's just very good practice to separate the two. And this is something that everybody does and is sort of like a standard. So we should definitely do it. And if you get into a situation where you're doing like production, staging, and testing and all that sort of stuff, all these different kinds of like a different deployment targets, then you can get into this situation where the code base is like still this huge one generic thing, and it takes, like for example, if you have a production deployment, you have environment variables. Think of it, it's almost like a function. So like your app is like this big huge function, and your environment variables are the parameters or the inputs, and then you execute it and it returns like this app, right? So you're going to have environment variables specific to production, environment variables specific to testing, and specific to staging. And you don't need to make a new code base for each one of these situations. It's all the same thing. It just relies on different environment variables being passed into it. And and even to go further, say you're making a code or an app that you want to make available to different clients. So you have client A and client B. It would be pretty lame if you had to make a new code base for each client. That's unmaintainable and unscalable. It'd be nice if we just use the one code base. And so you would have environment variables that you would put into your code base, and then you would deploy it to client A. And then you would have environment variables for client B, use the exact same code base. You're not changing anything. And then you deploy it to client B, right? So just a really good idea, something everybody does, something you should do. So let's look at how you would accomplish this in Node.js. So first, I've added a now.json to our Node.js project here. So one thing that I've added is something called a .env. This is a npm package. So you're going to want to add that. The second thing I've done is I've added a .env file. And so I have a DB URL. So the .env, usually this is what you would use for your dev local deployment or local development. And so say you're having a Node.js project and you have a database you sort of like spun up on your computer locally, then you would have like an address like localhost dot whatever. So this makes sense. So how do we get this? Like this .env file is not JavaScript. So how do we get this into our code? Well, if we look at our index.json or index.js, I've added this thing. So required .env. .config, this basically allows us to pass in some configuration like what file we're using. If I don't pass anything into it, it's going to assume I'm talking about .env. And now, once I've done this, it basically makes whatever is in this file available to my code here. So the way I access that is through process.env.whatever, right? So this db underscore URL corresponds to this here. Okay, so let's check that out. So if I do npm start, and let's look at this. Okay, great. So this right here represents this, and this is gotten from here. So this is great. Now, to make the separation really good, you're going to want to make sure that this, if this is set up with Git, in your .gitignore file, you're going to, of course, make sure that all these .env files are included in your .gitignore, or else they're in your code base, and some of those benefits we talked about earlier are gone. So you want to make sure that that is in your .gitignore file. So this is really good. So if I do now alias, I'm not going to do it because watching this go in silence is awkward. So we're just going to talk about it instead of watch it. If I was to do this, it's going to automatically pick up this .env file and deploy it. But of course, this is not going to work because if we look at this, this is assuming we are on my machine and we're talking about something that's local. But if we deploy, this isn't going to work. We want to specify a different database URL. And so this is why we have a different .env file. So if we click on this, this is just like a random, I have no idea what this IP address is. So yeah, so I'm not sure what that is. But this is just to demonstrate we would put a different URL for our staging environment. And so we want to push this file up to our deployment, our Zeit deployment, rather than this one, which represents our local situation. So the way you do that is you do now --.env equals .env.staging and now alias. And if I was to press enter on that, it would correctly take this file and use that. But just like now alias, this gets really old over time, having to type all this out. So I wonder if there's a way to just make now understand that this is what I want to use all the time. Of course there is. That is with our now.json. So let's just add .env equals .env. Gotta make sure it's double quotes. .env.staging. So now what I can do is just get rid of this, and we're back to our really simple command, and it's going to look first for the environment variable to use, and then it's going to get to now alias and look for the alias we want to use. So really, really nice. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. There's some other things we could do with our environment variables, but I'll save that for another video. But yeah, this is basically how you manage environment variables in Zeit. So let me know if you have any questions below. We'll see you in the next one.